vas a poder admitir las personas.
Ok, podemos comenzar entonces a admitir a las personas.
Listo.
Son las 5 p.m. Vamos a comenzar el seminario de Ciencias Atmosféricas para quedarse en casa. Hoy tenemos un invitado muy especial, entonces la presentación del seminario la vamos a hacer en inglés. También para darle la bienvenida a las personas invitadas por Brad, vamos a hablar a partir de este momento en inglés. Eventualmente hablaremos algunas cosas en español más adelante. Pues welcome everybody to this seminar today. We have a very special guest today. This seminar is usually held in Spanish, but today we have a very special guest, and he wants to speak in English, and so this seminar will be almost all of it in English. I want to first introduce, this seminar is organized by the Grupo Interacción Micro Mesoescala at the Centro de Ciencias de la Atmósfera at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. This group is led by Graciela Raga, and also is composed by Dr. Ladino, Christian Dominguez, and by myself, Alejandro. We work in very different kind of topics related with micro and mesoscale, like clouds, cloud interaction, cloud physics, dust, air quality, lightning, deep convection. So we are a very active group. And we also want to introduce you, if you don't know, to Yvonne. She is the person in charge of the communication office of the center, and she is the person that is helping us with the Facebook transmission. So thank you, Yvonne. Also, I want to introduce for all you who are new in this seminar to the journal of our center. It's called Atmosfera. It's a journal in English, although the name is in Spanish, and it's a peer-reviewed journal. It's an endeavor that the university is doing in order to promote atmospheric sciences. And the good news is that it's a free journal, so you can publish in this journal for free, no pay charges for authors, and it's also free for readers. So please, you're very welcome to participate in this endeavor. Read the papers, cite the papers, publish your papers in this journal, and then this journal will grow up and become more and more important in the area. Also, this journal has a special section that is called Opinion, where you can publish more like the science divulgation kind of papers or notes with very different approaches. For example, here we have an example by John Mejia, who is also here in this seminar today joining us. It's very interesting, like divulgation papers that you can read, you can make comments, ask questions. So it's very interactive. You can explore these possibilities in this journal. And today, I want to introduce to our very special guest, Dr. Bradford Barrett. He works at the US Naval Academy, but here at UNAM, He's a very special person for us. He works with a lot of the researchers of our institution, and it's so is how to say that, Brad, you are very querido here. You are very loved here in Mexico. And Brad has a bachelor in business administration with a master's and a PhD in meteorology by the University of Oklahoma, which is a very well-known university in the United States. I want to show you a very nice plot that Brad has in his webpage about what he does. It's very interesting because he works in a lot of different topics, but all of them related with convection, with intraseasonal variability, with Mesoescala, with Synoptic Scale. So he has a lot of different works in very interesting topics. And this plot is really nice because it shows very nicely all the kind of interest that Brad has. Also, I want to show, because he has a lot of papers, I just want to point just a very few of those that he has with persons from our center. These are just a few selection. It's not all the paper he has, but it's a very nice selection showing different ranges, different range of research that Brad does with persons of our center. So he's a very special guest. So Brad, welcome. Thank you for accepting this invitation. And I'm going to let you share your screen. Thank you for being here today.
Great. Thank you, Alejandro. Let's share the screen.
Oh, just a second. Just a small comment here. Please ask your questions at the end. Christian is going to lead the question section. You can ask your questions in English, but if you really want to ask questions and you're afraid of asking in English, perhaps you can ask in Spanish, because Brad speaks Spanish very well, so he can understand the question, I guess, perfectly. So feel free to ask questions in English, but if you prefer, also in Spanish. And also, what else? So no, that's all for now. So please welcome Brad, and it's all yours.
Great, Alejandro. Muchas gracias, Alejandro, y gracias a todos por asistir a la charla. La voy a dar en inglés. Lo siento por todos que hablan español, que ojalá que me entiendan en inglés. I'm going to speak in English because I feel more comfortable sharing the research results that are published in English and thought about in English. Para mí es un poco difícil combinar los dos idiomas. Cuando uno piensa en inglés, en inglés todo el tiempo o para traducir de un a otro de los idiomas. So thanks again, Alejandro, and all in the Centro de Ciencias de la Atmósfera en la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. Thanks for all of you for inviting me. It is a great time. You say that maybe I am querido or loved. No, I think it's the other way around. I have a very fond memory of my Fulbright year in Mexico City with you. Well, actually, Alejandro, you weren't there when I was there. So we missed by just a few months, I think, when we were there in 2015 and 16. So today I really would like to share some of the kind of a body of work that I've been working on with my students and collaborators over almost maybe a 10-year period here, really trying to understand subseasonal variability, focusing not just on Mexico, but also in the Americas in general, to understand what's going on in our atmosphere, in our climate system, this link between kind of the weather patterns of a couple of days and the climate patterns of a couple of months. What's the bridge between the two? That's the subseasonal timescale. So I acknowledge a lot of, I've had funding support from lots of different agencies in the US and also in Latin America. I'd like to acknowledge those right now. So let's advance the slide. Okay, great. So Alejandro asked me to say just a little bit about the institution where I'm coming from, about the U.S. Naval Academy. What is the Naval Academy, and how might we partner together? If some of you are interested in collaborations, I'm 100% open to that. So the Naval Academy is an undergraduate institution with about 4,400 undergraduate students located in the U.S. East Coast near Washington, D.C. We're about, I think, 30, 40 kilometers from Washington, D.C., about 1 hour's drive. And we have about 600 of us are faculty. The faculty are divided. This is an interesting institution. It's an educational university, but also a military training institution. So they combine both of those two missions. So the officers and the civilian faculty together are 600 of us, and the 600 of us achieve the mission. We graduate the undergraduate students. All the students are 100% undergraduate. We do have exchange programs with some other military institutions, and also there's an opportunity for some non-US citizens to come and study. So you have to be within a certain age range. It's kind of young, so 18 to 25 years old, but there are the options for people to do that. So in my department, oceanography department, we have 11 faculty, 11 teaching faculty. 8 of us have our doctorates and 3 have master's degrees. And we graduate about 45 students each year with Bachelor of Science degrees in oceanography. And the subjects of study range from the atmosphere into the ocean, biological and chemical oceanography, as well as atmospheric thermodynamics. So we do a lot of mixture of both. I think in UNAM, you have like Ciencias de la Tierra, you understand as well in UNAM, and also lots of other universities in Latin America, that it's really hard to focus just on one because there are so many links between ocean, atmosphere, land, etc. Okay, so goals for today. I want to introduce to you, for those who do not know, the principal mode of atmospheric subseasonal tropical variability, the Madden-Julian Oscillation. Last week, the center had Dr. Madden come and talk about a different series of wave variability on shorter timescales, which was really quite cool. I got to join that and listen to that presentation by Dr. Madden. And then I want to summarize and highlight some of the challenges in understanding the impacts of MJO, specifically focusing on 2 problems, 2 areas of study that are very important in Latin America, which are air quality and precipitation. And then talk through about some of those challenges and some of the results that I and my collaborators and my students have found. And then end here in maybe 30, 45 minutes or so to talk about the future. Where do I see this kind of work going? Where are some opportunities that I think are still out there? And specifically about time lags, like what does that mean? What is a time lag and how might that factor in? Okay, so the Madden-Julian Oscillation in its broadest sense is a very hemisphere scale region of kind of one area of upward motion and one area of downward motion. And there's a schematic there on the right of your screen that shows very nicely what I'm talking about there. That the area of upward motion covers almost the size of an ocean. It's a pretty big space. It's pretty big space, and it favors thunderstorms. It favors above normal activity of thunderstorms, the transport vertically of heat and moisture into the upper troposphere. And then displaced in space, so in this particular case, in the figure in front of you to the east, there's also a version to the west of this upward area are downward motions that would disfavor thunderstorms, that would favor heating and solar radiation. Not that you can't have thunderstorms or clouds in the area of subsidence of sinking motion, but you do have a region of sunnier skies, more sunny than normal. And the classic schematic there in the center, the one that I show my midshipman students very often at the Naval Academy and talk through, gives the idea that this MJO, this up and down that covers the tropics oscillation, moves east in time. The Earth is rotating, and that rotation of the Earth really drives the motion of our MJO system. And the schematic there that was developed by Madden-Julian almost 50 years ago now, gosh, it seems like just yesterday I was learning about it. The cloud feature is slowly progressing eastward, and the cloud feature kind of diminishes as it goes a bit eastward in time, as the oceans are cooler by Ecuador, Peru, Latin America, the coastline is cooler, so the MJO convection is a little bit less robust over in our hemisphere. The atmospheric circulation, though, continues. You can almost see that very nicely, this in, up, out in the atmospheric circulation. That moves around. And so this oscillation, this convection, this tropical mode of variability has huge consequences for so many elements of our atmosphere, ocean, climate system. It affects, of course, precipitation, it affects wind, it affects cloud cover, it affects sea surface temperature, it affects chlorophyll in the ocean, which affects fish, which affects like population food chains, those sort of things. So there's all these kind of interesting consequences local to this MJO. Another really important thing that I'll highlight here in a bit is all this release of heat in the upper atmosphere, as all that latent heat rises embedded in the water, and once it's water vapor, once it's released, has, again, very huge consequences for the circulation of the whole rest of the planet. And I'll share that in just a second. Ahora tengo 3 o 4 diapositivas en español para que ustedes que están hambrientos, que tienen hambre para algo en español. I have something in Spanish for you. I'm going to keep speaking in English, but the words there are in Spanish. So how was this MJO oscillation discovered? Well, back in the 1960s, there were observations made in some of the tropical Pacific islands of radiosonde launches and surface observations from sensors. And the analysts, including Madden-Julian, discovered that there was a return period of maybe 30 to 40, 50, 60 days. It varied depending on the season, depending on the island, depending on where they were looking at. But there was a couple of weeks of high pressure, a couple of weeks of low pressure, then a few more weeks later, high pressure again, and then low pressure again. And so back and forth. And that's kind of what's shown in the fact, the figure there in front of you, that's a time series of pressure anomalies over about 180 or so days. And the pressure anomalies, you don't have to squint to see that there is a very nice wavy tendency. Now, that's a very clear period of time, 1979, that was chosen that shows it very, very nicely. But that's essentially this idea of this oscillation. You have a few weeks of high pressure, a few weeks of low pressure as the precipitation, as the convection moves by. And it's visible also in other time series. So in the figure there in the upper right corner, it's a time series of air temperature at the Centro de Ciencias de la Atmósfera at CCA in Mexico City. And imposed on that are different averages. So the gray line is kind of the daily average, and then the red curve is the 7-day average, and the blue, different shadings of blue and purple are longer averages. And so again, MJO is one of many. So the bottom figures on the slide here are highlighting this idea of superposition principle, that the Madden-Julian oscillation will be kind of a longer period, slower evolving thing, oscillation in the atmosphere, that interacts with shorter frequency things like the synoptic time scale. Every few days, you might have a tropical wave pass by if we're in the month of September and August and September. Or if you're in winter, a cold front will pass every few days. That's the synoptic time scale. The diurnal time scale, every 24 hours, we go through a maximum and minimum of temperature that deals with radiation. So MJO is one of those kind of wavy things that adds all together to give the reality. And the time series there in the upper right-hand corner could be filtered to show this, the subseasonal, this sort of 1 to 2 month time period. Okay, so I mentioned at the outset that the tropical convection of the MJO does something. It's really valuable, or it has consequence on the atmosphere. So the series here of slides is just going to walk us through some of that consequence, and also walk us through 40 years of research. So at the upper left-hand corner there, Hoskins and Caroli, that was 1981, so nearly 40 years ago. They ran a very basic idealized model. They put a heat source in the upper atmosphere near the equator. So this is a polar view. The center of the diagram is a polar, North Pole maybe. And so they put a tropical, subtropical heat source and then ran their model. And what's plotted there are string function anomalies. And I'm not going to highlight too much of the detail there, but I think even on the small screens, you all can see that there are solid lines and dashed curves in that particular plot, which that indicates that there's some areas of like high and some areas of low. And so the heating of the tropics leads to a wavy response over the entirety of the, in this case, the hemisphere. Go forward 14 years, a different way of viewing the same idea. So place a heat source at the equator. This particular one was the date line and the equator intersection. Run a model, and you see, I think pretty nicely actually, you can see the wave train. You have the dashed lines will be negative anomalies, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative. Again, arcing across much of, in this case, the northern hemisphere, but also the southern hemisphere. So negative, positive, positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative, kind of arcing across with a bit of asymmetry across the equator. Also in 1985, the same kind of author, Hoskins, very prolific scientist from the UK, place heat source, move them around, run their models, their idealized simulations, and plot the anomalies and see what you get. And that's very, again, not going to focus on the details, but what I want to highlight is that notice the entire planet, for some places of those heat sources, the whole world has anomalies. So again, for the heat anomaly here, this looks like about north of Australia, and this particular spot for the bottom panel of the plot, panel C here. Run the model, and then a few days later, you get anomalies covering the planet, essentially, and that's really important. The anomalies are of stream function, of course, are related to wind. So the plot here that's highlighted is all these wind vectors are anomalous wind. And so again, the fact that you don't have a zero everywhere, the fact that you have arrows, means that the Madden-Julian Oscillation, the heating of the MJO, caused circulation, caused the atmosphere, the upper troposphere to move around. And then the final plot from 2012, more recent, we noticed that our journal started to allow color figures without charging $1 bazillion. So the same idea that again, the red colors there would be the positive anomalies, and the blue colors are negative anomalies, solid lines and dashed curves. And you can see kind of an arcing or a ray tracing of the path away from the Indian Ocean. So again, in this particular case, place a heat source in the Indian Ocean, and the whole world will respond, including all the way over into North America. So one of the core tenets of the work that I've done with my students over the last 10 years, the work with many of you, my colleagues, over those last many years as well, has been to try to understand, well, what are the consequences of the MJO? I haven't done a lot of work of understanding MJO itself, a little bit of understanding how it moves, but mostly the work I've done is understanding, why does it matter? How is it important? What does it mean for extreme weather? What does it mean for precipitation, for air quality? So I'm going to show you a series of results that come from those studies. To place in context this MJO, so again, many of you are very familiar with some of the processes that are labeled here: Rossby waves, Kelvin waves, the tropical cyclone symbols that are showing up there. The lightning bolts imply thunderstorms and convection. And again, the MJO does move east slowly around the planet. It kind of orbits the planet. It has a lot of internal variability. Sometimes it's really strong. Sometimes it's absent. Sometimes it stalls. Sometimes it goes backwards. Again, that's layer upon layer upon layer of complexity on MJO. And where again does MJO fit in a context of the larger circulation, the larger variability of our planet? I mentioned many of these scales. We have the Synoptic Scale, and the MJO links very strongly to the Synoptic Scale. It also links to the planetary scale, decadal variability, interannual variability like El Nino, La Nina. There's feedbacks. MJO can kick off El Nino, La Nina. MJO can be kicked off by El Nino, La Nina. We heard from Zane Martin, Dr. Martin, a couple of months ago about how the stratosphere, the quasi-biennial oscillation, has feedbacks onto the MJO, and how that process is complex, but also is very important for understanding the strength of the MJO and how it works. So again, this is nice to kind of place in context. I think that this is a neat figure, because I think everybody in the audience who's learning about the weather, learning about the climate system, weather, ocean, chemistry, biology, or as a scholar is studying that, can find your place in this diagram and can see how maybe what you study is close to the MJO or it's a little bit further away, but you don't have to imagine, it doesn't take a lot to imagine that the the processes of the Madden-Julian Oscillation will affect pretty much everything that goes on, which is, I think that's kind of cool. Also, by the way, that wasn't known. If you go back and read some of the early papers, some of the papers, I think, from Madden-Julian themselves, they were skeptical that their oscillation had consequences beyond the tropics. They weren't sure that that was the case. So interestingly, we as a community have, I think, confirmed that now. I don't think people would argue that MJO doesn't affect anything away from the tropics. So I'm going to show lots of diagrams that talk about the phase of MJO. So what is the phase? And that's kind of a community standard that we as a community have rallied toward. So the Bureau of Meteorology from Australia, Matt Wheeler and Harry Hendon in 2004, did a fairly basic statistical diagnostic of the MJO. They ran the lower level wind at 850 millibars, upper level wind at 200 millibars, the zonal east-west component of those two winds, and then the outgoing long-wave radiation. So those three variables, they ran a multivariate empirical orthogonal function analysis and came out with the first two leading principal components described a significant part of the variability of MJO. And so what's plotted in the diagram in front of you is the phase space diagram as you can track around the MJO. This plot I grabbed the other day from the Bureau's website. They identify broad geographic regions where this upward motion is located. So you see Indian Ocean, Maritime Continent, Western Pacific, Western Hemisphere as the MJO rotates around counterclockwise through the diagram. You also might say, well, Brad, those lines are a bit jagged. There's a lot of noise in the lower left-hand side in phases 1 and 2. There's a lot of lines kind of looping around. Welcome to the complexity of MJO studies, that the index is suggesting that the oscillation might have stalled back in the month of June. It may not have. Maybe the index itself has flaws. There's some studies that suggest this particular index is a good one, but maybe not the best index of explaining MJO. But nonetheless, in the results I'm going to share here the next few minutes, when I talk about phase, this is what I'm talking about. The number, I'll say phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. It's where on this diagram. So phase 2 and 3 will be Indian Ocean, 4 and 5 Maritime Continent, 6 and 7 Western Pacific, and then 8 and 1 Western Hemisphere in Africa as this MJO orbits around. In the diagram, one last thing, the further the index is from the origin, the stronger the MJO is. So the phase space analysis doesn't only tell us where the MJO is, it also tells us how strong it is. So a dot that's further away would be, in this particular diagram, would be a stronger MJO event. Okay, so first result here, air quality, specifically ozone in Mexico City. Many of you all have studied ozone in Mexico City, know that it is a major, one of the major contaminants of the city. And it's interesting because it's not generally emitted as a gas. It's usually a byproduct of other gases, of other interactions. There are sources of ozone, but usually ozone is a result of other chemical reactions. And for me, I'm not a chemist. I'm not an air chemist. I'm a meteorologist. You heard from Alejandro. That's my background. So I've really enjoyed partnering with Graciela and with others in Mexico City, specifically to understand a lot about this kind of process of how the air chemistry and how the MJO might affect the air chemistry of, particularly of Mexico City. So, otra diapositiva en español, lo siento. La figura, la imagen yo la tomé desde el castillo Chapultepec mirando hacia la avenida Chapultepec. So this picture is from the Chapultepec Castle in Mexico City looking out along the Chapultepec Avenue. And you can almost see the gray, hazy layer. They're hovering just above the transition from the city to the blue sky up. You can see this gray transition. That is the smog layer. That is the contaminated layer in Mexico City. And this particular day was pretty normal, pretty typical. It was, I forget what season it was. You have the, I think jacarandas, maybe they're blooming. Maybe that's not jacarandas. Because Mexico City is in the subtropics, that the solar radiation is quite most of the year. And so you can get a very deep growing of the planetary boundary layer. So you get an interesting kind of complexity there of the contaminants that are emitted by all of the surface emitters vehicles, factories, burning of various agricultural things. Those don't just stay right in the surface, they can actually disperse up into the lower atmosphere. In the presence of sunlight and in the presence of nitrous oxide and volatile organic compounds, there is a chain reaction that strips off the oxygen from those molecules. And so you have this diatomic oxygen we breathe and the monatomic oxygen, I think that's how you would call it, single oxygen that's volatile, that's unstable, that links then with diatomic oxygen to produce ozone, O3. And that process will speed up significantly in the presence of ultraviolet radiation. So one of the things that we did in this particular study is we looked at how does the MJO affect UV radiation? And one way the MJO can affect UV radiation is by clouds and precipitation. In fact, that's the one way that we looked. You all know that cloud cover doesn't completely eliminate radiation. Cloudy days are still light outside. It doesn't just shade the entire atmosphere. So clouds are not the only, they're not a perfect reduction of UV radiation, but they certainly do reduce it a little bit. And then at nighttime, if the atmosphere is still dirty, this volatile organic compounds and nitrous oxide can, when they bump into the ozone, they'll take back they'll take back the oxygen. So ozone in the surface will be destroyed at night and will be produced during the daytime. And that cycle we've seen in many, many megacities, not just in Mexico City. Breathing in ozone at the surface is bad. It causes cancer. That's one thing that I want to highlight. Why is this kind of study important? Well, again, ozone is dangerous for humans, for animals, for plants. It's not something we want to have in our surface layer. If we can understand why it varies and how the atmosphere can help us make better predictions, that's a good thing. So this particular study, we used the 22 or so stations of the Rama network that Mexico City began installing in 1986. 5 of the stations have long period records: Jalostoc, Merced, Iztapalapa, Pedregal, and Tlalnepantla. Those are around there labeled in the figure. Those were the stations that we analyzed for a long period. One of the challenges with MJO studies is because the MJO has a periodicity of a couple of months, let's say 2 months or so. If you have 1 year of data, you might get 6 MJOs. That's great, you have 6 MJOs, but if you want to develop a statistical understanding of what the MJO is, you need more than 1 year. You need more than 6 data points to understand how the cycle varies. So having a 30+ year data set is excellent for that. One of the challenges of this 30+ year data set is that Mexico City has improved its ozone concentrations. So the figure on the left there shows from Pedregal, the ozone concentrations were really high back in the early 1990s. They were, that's 400 parts per billion is terrible. And it's have come way down. The highest concentrations in the early to mid 2010s were still bad, but not terrible. Again, the study here, I was working on this while living and working in Mexico City, so we stopped the study in 2015. It would be really interesting to continue it on through 2020 and see if the result that we found continues to hold. So one of the first steps was to take the declining ozone data and detrend it, take out the trend. And I would encourage all of you who do any kind of climate work, that's an important step for a lot of what you do. You need to take out the long-term trends, if there are long-term trends. So that was what our attempt was to do here. The mean here is still close to 0, even though it looks like there's more values in the positive and less anomalies in the negative. We didn't just detrend it, we also converted it to anomaly space. But the average anomaly was still pretty close to 0. Not a Gaussian distribution, but still close. So what do we find? So here is the first of what I'm going to show many of the different plots on MJO. So we examined all these different stations. We looked at different hours of the day. So the different colored lines are for one particular station, but I think we have 7 different lines there and 8 different lines for the 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock on the hours of the day. And we found a really nice signal for MJO. I've been looking at MJO and studying the Madden-Julian Oscillation for many years to see this really nice single wave that deals with that relates to the phase space, that's to me an excellent result. That was something that was very exciting to see. So in this particular figure, we have high ozone concentrations in Mexico City in phases 3, 4, and 5, lower ozone concentrations in phases 8 and 1. And that was really neat. So why? So we went looking at, again, I mentioned a couple of the parameters here. So the high concentrations of ozone showed up here in phases 3, 4, and 5, and a different data set, completely different from reanalysis, told us that UV radiation was also high on those phases. And that was great. That allowed us to see that the Madden-Julian Oscillation was very likely causing this ozone variability, that it wasn't just random chance or something like that, because the independent data set also showed the UV radiation being high. And not only UV radiation was high, cloud cover was low. So on sunny days with low cloud cover, we have high ozone. And on cloudier days, be like during phases 1 and 2, we had lower UV radiation and lower ozone. That was a really neat result. Again, I'm going to show you other results that are a little bit messier, but we were really happy to see that. Graciela and I were, we sent it off to atmospheric chemistry and physics. And it was actually accepted pretty easily. One of the papers I haven't had to fight to get into the journal. That was pretty cool. So spatially, where is the cloud cover anomaly? Here is a particular plot. This is from summer. Other seasons had a little bit messier of a signal, so I'm showing summer here in the interest of time. But basically, the green boxes I've placed around phases 8 and 1. So again, here's phase 8 and here's phase 1. Suggested troughing anomalies near Mexico or over Mexico and higher cloud cover. Mexico City would be kind of in the center here of the plot. Mexico City is about here. So the blue shading is cloudier skies. We have cloudier skies in phases 8 and 1, less ozone. And then the the brown colors would indicate sunnier skies, and then we also had less ozone during those phases. So again, here are the sunnier skies, and we looked at multiple parameters, looked at the upper troposphere, middle troposphere, lower troposphere, and had a fairly coherent signal of all of those. I'll point out here that we did not examine time lags. We didn't look at how this would change over time. For example, if you have a day that's MJO phase 5, is the highest ozone the same day? Is it 3 days later? Is it 6 days later? We didn't look at that. And that'll be a theme that you'll see me come back to, that I suggest that those of us who do look at MJO, we might really want to think about time lags and think about how the teleconnection between the tropical thunderstorms and the thing we're looking at might relate. Again, during phase 5, the thunderstorms are over in Indonesia. That's where the convection is located. So in phase 5, there is a subsidence region. There's a sinking air that would be also near Mexico. And so that might have a direct effect, but time lags are important to consider. Okay, so let's turn to the other hemisphere, to Santiago, Chile, and also look at air quality. This is some of my first work. This is with a couple of my midshipman students, Sean Fitzmaurice, Sarah Pritchard, Anthony Testino, Kelsey Ragsdale. And we were looking again at both summer ozone, and also we're looking at winter particulates. PM10 is the small particulates, 10 micron or smaller, I think, that would be floating around in the atmosphere. Very bad to breathe those in as well. So a lot here on the slide that I want to highlight. Just a couple of things that we were analyzing, again, about 30 years of data. So the city of Santiago, Chile, they have a very nice network, just like Mexico City has, long-term observations, really high quality observations, hourly or even sub-hourly observations. And the graph there, the figure shows those different stations and different red dots and triangles and things. And we examined this is for ozone first, so summertime. And we found again that some phases had higher ozone concentrations. Phases 5, 6, and 7 in this case, for Santiago, were associated with above normal ozone concentrations. Those phases also tended to be associated with anti-cyclonic high pressure systems. And that's what's shaded in the bottom of the here. You can't see because I totally understand it's a bit small. So they were associated with high pressure systems and surface winds from the south that's from the polar area toward the equator. They were also tended to be associated with thermal inversions. So we had cooler air at the surface and then warmer air aloft, creating a little bit more of a stable environment, perhaps trapping some of the pollutants, again, the nitrous oxide and the volatile organic compounds that are doing the reaction to get the process going. Also, when you have, especially in Santiago, the Andes are, that's what the black bar there is, the Andes Mountains. They're so close to Santiago that when this particular weather pattern sets up, it's typically sunny skies. So the UV radiation was also high. Then the opposite was found in the phases of the MJO with low ozone. In this case, phases 1, 2, and 3 at lower ozone tended to be associated with low pressure at the surface and northerly winds from the equator, and also unstable or less stable atmosphere, cooler temperatures above the city, above Santiago and the region around Santiago. And that was again a pretty neat result for us. Pivoting to winter, so now we're talking about the months of June, July, and August in Santiago. We're again looking at the same stations. We were looking at the concentration of air quality of PM10 in the air in Santiago, and again curious, like, well, what phases are showing the most concentration of PM10, the dirtiest phases, what are the cleanest phases? And we found an interesting signal. Phase 6 here kind of threw us for a loop. We still don't know exactly what that is. It's a little bit of a kind of a bimodal plot, bimodal distribution. But again, the higher ozone, sorry, the higher PM10 phases were associated with less rainfall. So in Santiago, the rainy season is the winter months, June, July, August, September, and June, July. And so the rainier months there were associated with cleaner air. So the drier months were associated with dirtier air. The dirtier air was also associated with more of a temperature inversion. That was shown over on the plot here on the right. The thermal temperature as you go up in the atmosphere, the inversion was stronger in the dirtier air, just like we found for summer in Santiago, and similar to some of the work that others have done for Mexico City. And the cleaner phases in Santiago were associated with rainier skies and less strong temperature inversions. So that was a nice result. Okay, sticking with Santiago, Chile, and sticking with rainfall, how does rainfall vary with MJO? So you already saw the plot. I'll show you the whole of, not just Santiago, but all of Chile. And again, Chile is an interesting country. It extends north to south over a very large latitudinal range from about 15 south to 57 south. So that's a significant range there. And so many climate zones across, but still MJO we found would have an impact on, this is winter season. So this again is sort of May, June, July, August precipitation in Santiago. And the rainier phases 1, 2, and 8 in this case, were found to have higher rainfall in the center and south of the country, and were associated with low pressure systems offshore. And the drier phases, 3, 4, and 5, were associated with higher pressure offshore and different wind directions. And the statistical technique here that I'm showing is a pretty basic one. It's called composite analysis. So we took all of the observations that were linked on the particular day of an active MJO and averaged them up. And that's the plot that you see in front of you. Not a very advanced technique, but a really powerful one. One of the things that we did not consider, that for Chile, even more so than Mexico, I think it's very important to consider, because Chile has most of its land outside of the tropics, only a small part in the north are in the tropics. For Chile, we did not consider time lags. These are instantaneous anomalies. So on the day the MJO is in phase 1, you would expect rainier than normal. It doesn't have to rain, but you might have a higher chance of rain in winter. On the days when it's in phases 4 and 5, you might expect drier conditions in Santiago. And that is, again, maybe that's not the case. Maybe it really should be 6 days after MJO phase 8 leads to rainy conditions in Santiago. Again, that's an important asterisk or an important kind of note that I'm encouraging others to think about. Back to rainfall in Mexico, and this is one of the last results I'll share, and then we'll wrap up with some discussion and conclusions. I want to acknowledge my collaborators here. I worked with Marcos Esquivel. He's in Guanajuato, at the University of Guanajuato, and he was my first collaborator. Actually, my first collaborator in Mexico was with Marcos. And then Obviously, I've worked very closely with Juliet and Rosario and Paulina, and I'm acknowledging them here as well in this work that Juliet ended up basing her dissertation on here in the last couple of years. So the first result, this actually was published in Atmosfera. So Alejandro, I am a proud author in Atmosfera, and encourage it. You're right, it's a good journal. The peer review process was tough. We got good questions from people, and the publication is free. So it's quite nice to have open source. So we were focusing on Guanajuato because Marcos was based there, but we were really interested in looking at all of Mexico. So here we have anomalies of rainfall in the summer. We're focusing back in summer months. Mexico has a pretty strong seasonality in rainfall, especially in the center and areas of Mexico. For the summer months, we're looking at May, June, July, August, and September here. And the greener colors are rainfall above normal, and the yellow-orange colors will be rainfall below normal. We normalize the rainfall anomalies because some areas are rainier than other areas. The wind barbs at 700 millibars are shown there. A little hard to see those, I understand. And then the dashed and solid contours are geopotential height also at 700 millibars. And we ended up finding that some phases were associated with rain, other phases were associated with dry conditions. And in fact, that formed the baseline of Juliet's dissertation work that she took and did the last couple of years. So phases 8, 1, and 2, we found were associated with rainier conditions in central Mexico. And we also found that they were associated with rainier conditions because they were associated with upper level troughing. There was troughing lower pressures near Mexico. And we also found that phase 4, 5, and 6 were drier in Mexico. And we found that because they were associated with higher pressure systems. And again, when I say associated with, I mean, I'm looking at the anomalies here on the plots. And the positive anomalies would be high pressure anomalies, and the negative anomalies would be low pressure anomalies. And the nice thing here, again, I think you might even be able to see the symmetry here in the 8-panel plot. We have 3 phases that are rainy, 3 phases that are dry. And think back to the phase space diagram, the square from Wheeler and Hendon, their real-time multivariate MJO index. The phases 8, 1, and 2 are exactly opposite of the diagram from phases 4, 5, and 6. And that's really nice. Again, as someone who's been looking at MJO oscillation, MJO variability for many, many years, when you have adjacent phases that have the exact opposite signal, that's a little bit of a wild card. Like if phase 1 was rainy and phase 2 was dry, I would be skeptical of that. But because we have this interesting kind of dipole across different phases, that's to me a nice signal that kind of confirms, okay, this is what we're seeing. To Juliet's work, so she took what Marcos and I had done and took it much, much further. So one of the main drivers of Mexico's summer precipitation variability, many of you know the canicula, the midsummer drought. And there's a lot of uncertainty about how could canicula, this midsummer drought, interface with Madden-Julian Oscillation. And for those who aren't familiar with the canicula, what it is a pause in the rainy season. So the rains would start in the month of May or June, and then maybe the month of July would be a little bit less rainy and actually would be hot. So if it's not raining and it's July in Mexico, it's going to be hot. And I think that's part of the origin of the word there. And then in August and September, back come the rains. So you have this kind of bimodal peak, and then in the rains, you have 2 months that are rainy and then 1 month in the middle that's less rainy. And Juliet's main question that she based her entire dissertation on was, how does that vary with MJO? Does it vary? No one had ever looked at that before, how it tied to MJO. So the figure in front of you is a really nice result that's just hot off the press. It's coming out in press right now. And basically what Juliet and what we found is that phases, again, 8, 1, and 2 are the rainy phases. That's not necessarily news, but why are they rainy phases? Because they augment the Caribbean low-level jet. That the MJO circulation on the large scale results in greater moisture transport toward Mexico, toward Central America. So the red shaded areas there are greater transport of moisture. from the Caribbean low-level jet. And then the dry phases, 4, 5, and 6, are associated with reduction in the Caribbean low-level jet. Again, for those of you who are very familiar with this process, maybe you aren't surprised by that. And I don't think we were either. We were actually proud of it. We were excited to see it, because it physically makes sense that if there's a relationship between Madden-Julian Oscillation and Caribbean low-level jet, which we didn't dive too deep into that. Others had looked at it before, where there were some relationships between pressure, both in the tropics and the extratropics, that drive the pressure differences are driving the jet feature, and how MJO is adjusting those pressure cells. But that's basically what the process here. So I mentioned Juliet also really did focus on canicula. So I'll just share a couple of results here. The left-hand column is the first rainy peak. The middle column is kind of the drought, not a drought necessarily, but a reduction in rainfall and an increase in temperature. It gets hot. And then the third column there on the right is the second rainy peak. And again, what's shaded there in the bar graphs below is the relative frequency of those start, stop, the bimodal oscillation, the relative frequency by which those occur by MJO phases. And the fact that we see this interesting modulation is really impressive, really powerful. Has a lot to do with has a lot to benefit predictability. So the rainier phases, 8, 1, and 2, tend to be more associated with the first and the second rainfall peaks. And then the dry phases, 3, 4, and 5, tend to be associated with the onset of the dry period. So some years, again, to give you an example, in the month of June, if the dry phases come through in early June, you might have an early onset of canicula, and it could last a long time. That would be terrible for agriculture if you depend on the rainfall and it doesn't come. Other years, if you are expecting the canicula to come in June and the wet phases are passing through in June, you don't get your canicula. It may start later. That could also be bad for agriculture, because you might be expecting, to harvest your crop, or you don't want it to keep raining for three more weeks when you're ready for it to stop raining. Again, this is the really, I think, exciting application of Juliet's work. Again, this is hot off the press, so we'll welcome collaborations with folks who want to kind of dive into that in a little bit more detail. Okay, and then finally, last piece here, I'll pivot back to Chile and also talk a little about the US. Some exciting work on tornadoes and MJO and extreme events. And basically, my colleagues, Victor Gensini, David Gold, Paul Servatka, and John Allen and I have been looking at how MJO and other subseasonal modes in the extratropics, like the global wind oscillation, how they might affect tornado activity. So we're looking at the US first, and Victor and I found that for the month of May, the MJO phases 4, 5, and 6 seemed to be really important. So that's the upper left figure here for the red curve here is for the month of May. So there's maybe a peak there with tornado frequency occurring more often in phase 5 than other phases. And then maybe a few weeks ago, actually, this study came out that showed that the oscillation, actually this is a few weeks ago, this is maybe 2 years ago, the oscillation MJO is really quite noisy, that there's some kind of quick transition. I know I said a few minutes ago that the quick transitions tend not to be MJO related, and that might still be the case, but you're kind of looking at in April, phase 4 tends to have a below normal modulation of tornadoes, whereas in May, in June, especially in June, the month of MJO phase 4 has an above normal tendency. I don't think we understand that very well. Again, this is the paper that came out just a few weeks ago in this summer 2020 that suggested that the convection over the maritime continent led to a lot of upward motion over that area, which led to downward motion over here by Mexico. That actually might help also explain what Juliet found in the links with canicula and other oscillations. And that downward motion would cause high pressure circulation, which would lead to moisture transport up into North America, into the United States particularly, not necessarily Mexico, sort of around the periphery there, that would help to augment the tornado formation. And then lastly, let's see, We have in Chile, so Julio Marin and Martin Yaxcoper, the three of us looked at an unusual tornado event from last year in the late May of 2019. There were at least two tornado days, maybe a few other tornadoes that formed there in Chile. We were very curious, how did the tornadoes relate to MJO? And so Martin put together this really nice plot that suggests that the pressure field on the last part of May, there's low pressure off the coast of Chile, resembles very nicely the standard pressure field during MJO phases 1 and 2. And not surprisingly then, the tornadoes in Chile occurred during MJO phases 1 and 2. So this composite analysis and linking and trying to explain extreme events like tornadoes in Chile there are not any studies that examine tornadoes in Chile. One thing we did not consider, and again, it's partly my fault because I am lead author on this particular study, and this just came out in 2020, so this is brand new work. We didn't consider time lags. We examined the individual phases. We didn't say 6 days after phase 1 were tornadoes happening. No, we examined the actual concurrent times. So I think there's something to be said for time lags. Great. During the tornadoes here in South Central Chile occurred during MJO phases 1 and 2. Okay, so Alejandro, I'll wrap up here and talk a little bit about the future, and then we'll talk for questions. So the future, where do we go? What do I see as kind of where I think the community is going? And I just have a few ideas here that I want to throw out there. You heard me say time lags, so I'll start with that. So time lags, the idea that the convection of the MJO and the substance of the MJO, I don't think they produce instantaneous responses in the atmosphere. They might for Mexico, for Central America, especially in the summer months, May, June, July, August, as the convection of the MJO passes relatively close by to Mexico, they might have an instantaneous response. But the extratropics, 30 degrees north and south and beyond, I don't think there's not an instantaneous response. And Casa, 2008, very well cited Nature paper that showed the time lags. He found an average time lag of 7 days from the convection to the extratropical response. Gina Henderson and I and our students have looked at the Southern Hemisphere. We found a huge range in time lags, sometimes as quick as 3 days, other times as long as 20 days. So time lags are really important for any work on MJO. Secondly, superposition. I hinted at this a little while ago about talking about how quasi-biennial oscillation might affect Mexico and how it might affect precipitation. There hasn't been a lot of work done on this. I think there's some. I think that the more work has been done on how the MJO itself relates to the different modes of variability. So during El Nino, weaker MJOs are favored. During La Nina, stronger MJOs are favored. This kind of thing. During easterly QBO, stronger MJO is favored. During westerly QBO, weaker MJO is favored. But I think the challenge for studies like the ones I've showed you is we really need lots of samples. We need long periods of record if we're going to slice and dice them many ways. So you have 8 phases of MJO, so you take your data set divided by 8. And then if you have 3 phases of La Nina, 3 phases of ENSO, La Nina, neutral, El Nino, then you take each of your MJO phases and split them 3 ways. So now you take your data set and divided it by 24. Well, if you don't have 24 years of data, then really have a small sample size. So I think that's some of the challenge. Now, there are ways around that, and I haven't done that myself at the Naval Academy. You can use modeling studies and sampling. There are lots of ways to build up your sample size. So any of you in the audience who are interested in collaboration that you might want to contribute an idealized modeling study or any kind of modeling study, great, let's talk. I'm happy to engage with you. And then finally, some of the work that Paul Roundy, especially at the University of Albany, has been leading. There are many others, though, that have been looking at this. Angel Adams and Angel Adams, and started listening on Facebook. It's like, Brad, get my name right. And Xilong Zhang at Washington, and many others have looked at the characteristics of MJO itself. I've looked at 2 characteristics, the phase and the amplitude. Where is it and how strong is it? I didn't look at how fast is it moving. I didn't look at what's the direction of movement? Is it east, west, some other direction, sort of northeast? There's I guess, difference in MJO propagation in boreal summer than it is in boreal winter, the seasonality of the MJO itself. I haven't looked at that directly. So I think there's a lot of ways as well to really hone in. You know, many of you all in the audience and folks I've worked with in Chile especially have tried to take this statistical composites and turn them into forecasts. And it's hard because you have the averages and the composites, but the variability is huge. And so some ways to limit the variability might be to examine the superposition or the different characteristics of the MJO. And then finally, you know, I started off the talk with a presentation of the idealized studies of placing heat sources around the tropics, running a basic model, plotting the stream function anomalies and seeing what happens. I think it's time to do that again. I haven't seen any recent work on that, certainly not in the last, you know, 5 or so years. There may be some ways to do that for future climates as well, to really see and get a better sense of what MJO might do based on some of the idealized work. So with that, Alejandro and Christian, I think I'll stop. I want to acknowledge, I threw up a list of about 20 people here. I'm sure I forgot at least 20 other folks, students, collaborators from the United States, from Mexico, from Chile, and beyond. So thank you to all my collaborators. Again, I also acknowledge the gracious funding support from the National Science Foundation, ONR, CONACYT Fondesit of Chile, DEGAPA de la UNAM, and the Fulbright program, which funded my estancia, my sabbatical in UNAM. So with that, I'll stop and we can have questions.
Thank you so much, Brad, for your presentation. Very good job. I'm Christian, and I have the pleasure to conduct the question and answer section. So please raise your hand and I can unmute your microphone. The questions can be in Spanish or English because Brad speaks 2 languages. So please don't be afraid. Questions? Come on. Okay. Yes, go ahead, Hani Biwast.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Brad sir. My question is there any effect of MJO in Bangladesh coast, please?
Yeah, great. So Hanif, welcome. Thanks so much for joining. I think it's currently 4 a.m. in Bangladesh, so I know
Yes.
you're up early, so I appreciate you joining the talk. Yeah, that's a great question. So the effects of MJO in Bangladesh, I don't know of any studies that have directly focused on Bangladesh, only Bangladesh. And so I would say that there's a lot of potential for work to examine the subseasonal variability. One of the nice things about over in the Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean is that I don't think you have to think about time lags too much because the convection is right there. It's very local, unlike the extratropics where the convection has to arrive, or the response has to arrive by a Rossby wave, by a teleconnection.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Tana.
Okay, thank you for your question. Anyone else? In the meantime, I have from the chat. It's from Arturo. He has a question related to the Rossby and Harwich waves. And the question is, can simply Fourier analysis like Dr. Madden used for Rossby-Harwich be used for NGO instead of principal component analysis like Hendon and Wheeler? What are the advantages of using PC analysis instead of Fourier?
Great, Arturo, una muy buena pregunta. I will speak in English though, since the question was in English. First of all, I think that it's certainly possible to examine MJO using multiple techniques. The Fourier analysis is a way of filtering the data or expressing it. The principal component analysis is also a way of filtering or expressing. I don't know, and this may be something you know more than I, if or not if, but how the advantage for Fourier for multivariate analysis. And I'm sure there's a way to do that. I think that Wheeler and Hendon shows that, and as I said, Wheeler and Hendon was one of the first to really become a dominant player in the community. More recently, other revised indices have come online. George Kalaitis has an index that's based only on OLR that's really popular. Michael Ventries has a velocity potential index. Lou from Stony Brook has a revised index. I think there are a couple of revised indices that are coming online now to try to better weight these things. And so Arturo, I think the multivariate character, trying to bring in multiple variables, OLR, zonal component in the lower troposphere, zonal component in the upper troposphere. I think that's maybe what kind of forced their hand. I think also because Wheeler and Hendon's that is real time. It's available essentially with a 1-day lag, so you can see today's index, you can see it tomorrow. And I don't know, with the sliding averaging of the Fourier decomposition, I'm not sure you can get at it with if you're doing like a 30-day averaging, or if you have your bandpass filter of 30 days, I think 15 days is the greatest lag you can get. Again, that's not my expertise there, but that's my guess as to the process of why the community has decided that PC, principal component analysis, empirical orthogonal functions, is a more standard way to represent MJO. It's not the only one. I know John Mejia is on the call. I think he used Fourier for his analysis. Maybe he used PC as well.
Oh, thank you so much for your answer. We have a second question from Julio Martinez. Why NGO events are stronger during La Nina?
Great question as well. My understanding of that is because the warm pool of the Western Pacific Ocean is augmented during La Nina. So the sea surface temperatures over by the Philippines, by Australia, by Indonesia, by the maritime continent, is the sea surface temperatures are warmer. So as the MGO moves out of the Indian Ocean into the Western Pacific, instead of dying down, it stays active. It stays convectively robust. And so the latent heat release can extend all the way past Hawaii, south of Hawaii, past the date line into the Western Hemisphere during the La Nina events. That's my understanding of those processes.
Oh, thank you so much for your answer. Anyone else? Please don't be shy. That could be in Spanish too. Okay, I have a question. We're the group of microscale and to mesoscale interactions. We will discuss in your great paper about the ozone and the NGO, because we're trying to understand what happened during this pandemic time, you know. So we were wondering if you have explored other pollutants, I mean, like carbonic dioxide or something like that. Those kind of pollutants have some signal when the NGO or just the ozone?
Yeah, Christian, that's a great question. And in fact, Graciela was very strongly encouraging me to look at multiple pollutants from the Rama network that has really great quality observations over many, many years. And I didn't share with you, but we have looked at carbon monoxide, CO, and the signal is a little bit more messy. I'll just be fair. I would say we haven't gone very deep in that because sorry, not just CO. We also looked at NO2. I think that was the one we looked at, NO2, NOx, NOx, maybe N2. I'm not sure exactly which one we looked at, but we looked at a nitrous oxide-like gas. And those two, carbon monoxide and nitrogen, were messier signals. And so because the ozone signal was so clear, we focused on that and left behind the others. So again, I would say, Christian, that that's an open area of study that you can appreciate. That I don't think the MGO causes too much variability in the emissions. Maybe it does. Maybe when it rains, there's more cars or there's less cars, so you have more or less emissions. But certainly rain would be a way of diluting or of cleansing the atmosphere. So there may be a very non-linear effect there, Christian. But sure, I think that's an area of possible collaboration. Maybe we can talk offline and see what we think about.
That's great. We have a last question that is from Anne. And the question is, if NGO modulates ozone in Mexico City, does that mean that the political solutions does not have such a big impact? Or can you reduce ozone if NGO plays such a big role in its concentration?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think this is my suggestion, kind of viewing from the outside. I've lived in Mexico City, but I don't live there now. I think the political solution is really vital. And I think where MJO comes in is that it can help to forecast. Can you imagine a day where you know with a pretty high confidence that the meteorology will support contingencia ambiental, the extreme concentrations 5 days in advance, 7 days in advance? Then the political leaders can take the necessary steps, not in like an urgent sense. I mean, of course it's urgent, but not the day before, or almost in some cases, if I remember correctly, the decisions have almost been that the contingencia ambiental is reached on a particular day, so then you have to wait to the next day for the restrictions to take effect. Can you imagine that instead of reacting to the atmosphere, you predict? So use the predictability of the MJO, the predictability of the synoptic environment to anticipate extreme pollution events before they happen. To me, that's a really beautiful and powerful application of this work.
Yeah, sounds very interesting. So thank you so much for your presentation. I really enjoy it. And that's all from me. So Alejandro, please go ahead.
We still have some questions, but we thanks the people. We also thank the people that are following us from Facebook. So Yvonne has one question from someone in Facebook. So.
Okay. Hi, Brad. Thank you very much for your presentation. We have a question for Ana Carla Fernandez in Facebook. She said, is there any study related to air quality and MJO done over the western part of US?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think actually that was the pioneering studies. The first studies that I know of were for Los Angeles, California, the US West Coast, and the leaders of those studies were NASA scientists who were based in laboratories in that particular region of southwestern United States. And so they were looking at ozone quality there. One thing that we looked at with Graciela Raga, with Arturo as well, Arturo Retama, forgive me, I'm getting he's for listening to the audience, like, Brad, what is my name? We looked at an interesting synoptically driven stratosphere-troposphere exchange event, and we didn't emphasize it too much in our paper, but our hypothesis was that that event was also tied to MJO. Now that was a Mexico event. It was in March of 2016, a very extreme ozone event that kicked off 5 or 6 days of very high quality, high concentrations of ozone that was related to a stratosphere-troposphere exchange event. So yes, there are, I think the leader or the first studies came out of the southwestern United States, but I think that Latin America is a region, the megacities of Latin America. I've not seen much work on Buenos Aires or in Brazil, for example, or some of the other places in Mexico, Guadalajara, or other cities that also have high contaminants that might have links to MJO. I know Graciela and I were talking about that. We didn't have time to look into that. That's a very good question.
So we have more questions from Facebook?
No, no more questions. Thank you very much, Brad.
Okay, Brad. The Doctora Telma, the head of our center, want to thank you for your presentation. She had to leave early, but she liked it, your presentation, and she was very interested in your research on ozone in Mexico City.
Great.
So Brad, I guess that we had a lot of questions. So I just want to thank you. We had the pleasure to have connected also Juliet. Julio Marin is also connected. Perhaps they want to say something. I don't know. Let me, Juliet, do you want to say something, or you, Julio? No? Okay.
It's okay.
Okay, they are very shy today. Oh, Juliet.
Okay. They're trying to figure out how to work the Zoom commands.
Yeah. Juliet, I'm trying to turn on your microphone. Okay, now.
Sí, soy un poco tímida, pero bueno, me lanzo porque siempre es muy, es muy agradable escucharte, Brad, y aprendo siempre con tus pláticas. Y pues nada, que me ha gustado mucho trabajar contigo todos estos años y ojalá podamos seguir colaborando juntos. A la MGO todavía le queda bastante por explorar. Y pues muchas gracias, Brad.
Sí, gracias, Juliet, y te agradezco mucho por tus plots, que ya presenté mucha información de que tú hiciste. Así que muchas gracias, Juliet, por colaborar también en estos estudios.
Gracias, Brad, a ti.
Okay, so Brad, thank you very much. I guess that was your talk was really interesting. You are working on really exciting stuff. Just to mention that we are also working, trying to find the modulation of the NGO in phenomena like the human resonance. That is an ongoing work with Brad and our group. So it's very interesting. A lot of possibilities in these topics. We also want to thank you, Brad. The center want to give you this small certificate for your talk today. Thank you very much for being today. And remember that you are always very welcome at UNAM.
Gracias, Alejandro, y gracias a todos por asistir. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's been a pleasure to share with you the last hour and 20 minutes about MJO.
Okay, and just, I'm going to say this in English, but remember that this seminar is mainly in Spanish, but if you want to receive information about future seminars, you can go to this webpage and fill a Google form with your data, and you will keep receiving emails about future seminars. Some of those seminars will be in English, most of them will be in Spanish, but don't be shy. If you want to participate in next seminars, if you want to give a talk, you can write to us. You can write to my email or to Christian's email, and you can make a proposal of a seminar. It can be in Spanish or in English if you want, or you prefer. So you will be very welcome to present in the future seminars, especially next year seminars. And we want to thank you, all you, for being here. All the people that are here in Zoom, and also the people are following us in Facebook. These are the social networks of our center. So you want to keep information, you want to keep receiving information about the events that the center does, is you can find information in this page. For example, if you go to the Facebook page, you can watch again all the seminars that we have last week of the panorama, including the Roland Madden talk about the Rossby-Hurwitz waves. So please go and visit that video if you are interested. And again, our next seminar will be very interesting topic about parametrization of convection, a different way to parameterize convection. So it's a very interesting and perhaps controversial topic. It's very interesting about some bubbles models or bubble parametrization of convection. by Dr. Daniel Hernandez from the National University of Colombia in Bogota. So you will be very welcome to join our next seminar on September the 15th. Thank you very much. Brad, muchas gracias por estar con nosotros nuevamente y muchas gracias a todos los que siguieron el seminario el día de hoy.